It has been a long time coming, but it is finally here. Welcome to Talkin Dynasty with Garrett Price and Jared Wackerly, or Jared Wackerly and Garrett Price, depending on the order that you want to put them in. There's great debate as to which order they should be in, but either way, both myself and Jared Wackerly are here. Jared, how's it going, buddy?
It's going, man. I think the contract that we signed is your name first.
Okay.
Guys, don't let Garrett fool you. He was real adamant that his name comes first. So
For sure. If you've ever seen the Blake and Drake video, that's basically what happened. If
didn't
you
you send
haven't,
me
go
that
look it up.
when we were coming up with the show name?
I did. I did
Yeah.
send you that as we were deciding who should go first. And I still don't even know whose name is first. We don't know. We may never know. But what we do know is this is something that we've been talking about forever. Jared and I sitting down, doing a regular show. The rhythm of this is going to be roughly every 2 weeks. This is going to come out in YouTube form, but we're also going to put it out in podcast form. So if you're not seeing our beautiful faces, you can head over to YouTube at the Dynasty Nerds page, and you'll see us there. And we're actually even going to make a guest appearance of this show on the regular Dynasty Nerds show, July 18th. So you're going to be hearing a lot more from the two of us. Now, the flow of all of this is going to be a little different than some of the other things that we might have done in the past. And, we talked about how we wanted this to be set up, how we wanted it to work. And Jared was really the one that kind of solidified what we were both thinking on how we want this to work. So, Jared, you kind of want to explain to everybody how Talkin Dynasty is gonna work for us.
Yeah, so it's going to be just a laid back show, open discussion, just dialogue, not really a structured, bullet pointed out, laid out format. It's us going to be talking Dynasty. We're going to get into more of the game theory side of things, talk about what Garrett does, what I do, different approaches we take with our rosters, managing our teams. And then we also want to have on guests in the industry that may have a different approach or a different skill set than Garrett and I do. And we just want to pick their brain and learn from them. So that's really the angle of this show. It's not so much week to week player talk, though. I mean, by nature, we're going to get into some player talk, I assume. But yeah, this is mainly our aim is to just talk Dynasty and the game theory around it.
Yeah, and there might be weeks where the show is 30 minutes. There might be weeks where the show is 2 hours. We have no idea. Like, we really don't. We're literally just going to sit down and we're going to talk Dynasty. And whenever that naturally comes to a conclusion is when it comes to a conclusion. And that it is what it is. So
I first sent you this is the first episode. And I was in an airport and I was just kind of mapping out the first show because, let's tell everybody we're talking startups today. We're talking about approaching your startups, what you do while you're in a startup, all encompassing of a startup. And Garrett's like, dude, this looks like a 2-hour show. And I was like, dude, I don't want to have a cap on our show. I just want to go like we're Joe Rogan or something. But no, we're definitely not going to try to surpass like an hour and a half, but because we got kids, we got lives. But
sure.
if it goes long, it goes long.
It is what it is.
So
yeah, you're right. We're talking startups this week because we felt like that was a natural starting point for a show that's going to be discussing theory and strategy. Like, where better to start than where you start your league at draft day? That's where it all begins. So let's start before we get into the actual draft itself. There's a lot of things that we need to make sure that we're ready for before the draft even begins. And it sounds so stupid, but you better know your league settings because I can't tell, like, I've done this. This is coming from actual experience where I'm 4, 5, 6 rounds into a draft and I didn't realize that there's a quarter point per first down, or
Right.
I didn't realize like little minute details that I just did not take the time to pay attention to, and it would have altered my draft strategy. Like, you're better about that kind of stuff than I am, right, Jared?
Going into a league, or as soon as you agree and pay your league dues, Well, before you pay your league dues, you're going to obviously look at the league settings. Is this a league that I want to join? Are these the type of settings that I want to play in? So, I mean, obviously, if you're joining just your friend's league and you say yes, like that might have been you in that situation, then you might not have really paid attention. But I mean, I don't think you and I pretend to be the smartest dudes in the world. So we make our mistakes, and we're not experts by any means, but we're going to give you a little bit of what we do and strategies that we've seen others do and we think might be a good idea for you.
Absolutely. Now, if from a commish standpoint, when these leagues are starting out, there's a whole other slew of things I don't even know that we're going to have time to get into today. We're talking about this just from joining a league standpoint. I'm sure at some point we'll talk about it more from a commissioner standpoint, because there's a lot of little details that you need to go over as far as, how you're collecting league dues, how many years in advance you're
That'd
collecting
be a good show
league dues. Like
on its own.
Yeah, in fact, let's plan that. We'll plan at some point to do a show specifically for commissioners, the strategy on, how to do that, how to do it well, what good leagues look like, what bad leagues look like, our successes and failures as commissioners. Because look, I'll be honest, there's leagues where I've done a pretty good job. There are other leagues where it's like, Garrett, you got to pay attention to this.
Garrett, you're going to add these two guys to the league so we can do a rookie draft?
I don't have no idea what you're talking about. So that'll be a whole show in and of itself. But from just joining a league standpoint, make sure you know what the settings are. Make sure you understand the nuances and the implications of what those mean. A time where I got this correct was very early on, actually the first Dynasty league. It wasn't just, I had done some other regular redraft leagues, but the first Dynasty league I ever played in, and it's still going today. It's my log running one with some of my closest friends called the Brotherhood. It's a bunch of guys from college. One of the league settings in there was, it was only one quarterback, because back then, like, Superflex wasn't even a thing yet. But the way we were a little bit edgy is it was half a point per completion. And so it changed a lot of scoring settings for the quarterbacks, because I mean, if you're completing 30 passes in a game, 25 passes in a game, that's a lot of points that get added to your quarterback. And so I remember the very startup, the first guy that went, your traditional startup back then, redraft mentality was, got to get your running back. So first guy off the board was Trent Richardson.
Oh, gosh.
Second guy off the board, Alfred Morris.
I love hearing these names.
Third guy off the board, Doug Martin. Those are the first three names off the board. I'm sitting there at pick 4, and I'm like, I don't think anyone has actually realized the implication of how valuable a quarterback's going to be, especially in a league where they last like forever. So you know who I took? Took Aaron Rodgers.
Boom.
That panned out pretty darn well.
Have you won that league?
What's that?
Have you won that league?
Shut up, Jared. All right.
And I mean, just to add on to like the implications of like league settings. So it's really important to look at starting lineups and how many wide receivers you have to start, how many flex spots there are. So it's, you can kind of think of it in terms of like supply and demand. If you need to start 3 wide receivers instead of 2 wide receivers, then obviously there's 12 more wide receivers that need to be started each week, assuming you're in a 12-man league. So that's going to push up the value of wide receivers because the demand is higher. And then you need to have more depth. And then, there's wide receivers tend to be more consistent from week to week. So with 3 wide receiver starting spots, you need to have more reliable receivers, so to speak. And then with flex spots, same thing. You and I were kind of talking about it before the show. I just said it, receivers score more consistently. So that tends to put even more demand on wide receivers because you want to have more consistent scores in those spots.
Right.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah. And it's simply just something too of like where you place your focus and how early you're taking those players, because I am a guy that even though I like to build around wide receivers, lately in startups, there's been such a plethora of good young receivers that I've been waiting a little bit longer than I used to on wide receiver. But in a league where I'm starting 3 wide receivers and there's 2 flex spots, not including the super flex spot, that's a lot of starting spots. Your chances are you're only going to have 2, 3, at best 4 running backs that you feel confident starting week in, week out. So you're going to have to focus a little bit more on probably those wide receivers than you would have otherwise to make sure that you have the depth and the ability to have enough starters to really get your team going.
Yeah. And then should we touch on Superflex for 1 QB?
We should, because I think Superflex is becoming the standard almost in startups. I know that there's still probably more 1 QB leagues just because how long they've been around.
Traditionally, yeah.
Yeah, but if you're joining a startup, I would say there's an 80 to 90% chance that's a Superflex league.
I only join Superflex leagues now. That's my favorite way to play it. It drastically increases the quarterback position's value because you have the ability to start 2 rather than 1. So again, supply and demand. And quarterbacks tend to score the most points. So they drive the economy in Superflex leagues. So honestly, you cannot get enough valuable quarterbacks on your rosters. Are you a quarterback hoarder in Superflex leagues? Like that's a whole archetype in itself. Sure. I mean, there's so many different archetypes nowadays that people throw out there in your startup drafts. Like, have you ever done the QB hoard strategy?
Not to its fullest extent, but traditionally it is very common. I don't think I've ever left a 12-team startup that's Superflex with less than 3 starting caliber quarterbacks. I don't think I've ever left with less than that. But there have been times where I've had 4 and 5. Now, usually that 4th one and 5th one are guys like Ryan Tannehill right now. You know what I mean? Where he is technically a starter, but how long is he really going to be a starter? Baker Mayfield, that caliber is usually the 4th or 5th guy. But still, those guys still carry value because how often does a quarterback get hurt preseason, first 2 or 3 weeks of the year, and that was the team that only drafted 2 guys, and now they're scrambling, and all of a sudden you can now trade that Ryan Tannehill, that Baker Mayfield for more than he would have ever been drafted for. Because listen, guys, the cheapest you will ever get a starting quarterback is in the draft.
Yep.
Once you try to trade for one and people realize how tough it is to acquire one off a team, because I almost never, unless I really am a team with 5 quarterbacks, I'm probably not willing to trade a quarterback unless I'm also getting a quarterback or a draft pick that could be a quarterback in return. I'm probably just not doing it. So if you are a person completely devoid of quarterbacks on your team, you only have 1 starter, or you have 2, but the second guy is real iffy, good luck getting one, because it is really expensive to get a quarterback after the startup. Don't you think, Jared?
Yeah, I mean, I'm even targeting backup quarterbacks towards the end of startups. But I mean, they have to be within some sort of mold. I like backups that if they're thrown in, they're quality players. Maybe they have a rushing floor, but no, I agree. Do not punt quarterback in Superflex startups. And I mean, one of my favorite things to do, I just did a startup recently where I wasn't able to do this because you always have to have the other guy on the other end ready to accept a trade. But I always try to trade back up into the first round, or try to at least get a second elite quarterback, assuming that I already took one with my first pick, because I think that gives you such a big advantage week to week. I mean, in 6-point pass touchdown leagues where quarterbacks, they get that extra 2 points. Some leagues are 4 points. 11 of the top 15 scores are quarterbacks. In 4-point pass touchdown leagues, 12 of the top 25 scores, so almost half. So that just tells you how valuable these guys are.
Yeah, no, they're crazy, crazy valuable. are you, and you kind of made it, you kind of led with this just a second ago. It sounds like you do almost always take at least one quarterback with your first two picks, if not both of your picks, and you might even be trading up to get a higher quality one with your second one. So is that something that you do basically all the time? Like you're walking away with one or two quarterbacks within the first two picks?
So I feel like it depends on the year.
Okay.
This year, I mean, quarterbacks are going like crazy. I mean, everyone's catching on. Like it's not like a hidden secret anymore. But if I have like the 101, 102, or 103, like I'm cool with trading back if I can to like 6 or 7 and maybe get like Justin Herbert or Lamar Jackson and then pick up some more draft capital or maybe a future, like a 2024 first with that trade. And then possibly getting Deshaun Watson at like 204 or depending on where I need to be, like, or Dak Prescott. Like I'm cool with those two guys. If I compare like a Lamar Jackson with Watson or Prescott, and I look at those as two top 10 quarterbacks. So I'm willing to trade out of like the top 4 guys.
I do want to get into trading in a little bit, but there are a couple other things I want to touch on real quick. I'm with you. I typically do my first round pick is usually a quarterback in super flex leagues. If not, I'm usually taking one in the second. This year, though, like you mentioned, people are catching on. And so I'm always trying to find where the value is. And I think that's the crux of my startup strategy is value-based drafting. Like I am going to try to scoop up value wherever it is. If that means I need to move up, if that means I need to move down, if that means like I really don't care. I care about value. And so what I've seen is even though I am still going to be a guy that walks away with 3-4 quarterbacks in the draft, there have been times where I'm at pick 11, or something like that. And I get an offer to move up to my pick that I'll completely trade out of the first round. And then the guys that are there available for me in the second round, I don't love. So there have been times where the first quarterback I'm taking is in the third or fourth round. Now, I then am probably taking a quarterback in the third, the fifth, and the seventh, to try to insulate that position. But that's where the value's been a lot. I don't want to get too much into specific players, but there are a lot of players in the third and fourth round at quarterback that are still very good players that we could see as round 1 or 2 guys next year. Guys that are older that are in rounds 8, 9, 10 that, maybe you're not getting, 10 plus years out of them like you are some of the other guys that you'll take at the beginning, but you can get 3 to 6 more years out of these quarterbacks. And in Dynasty, that's an eternity. I bet most of the people watching this right now don't have many leagues that are over 6 years old. So, that is a long time in Dynasty. So sometimes the value isn't necessarily just, I got to get these awesome quarterbacks. It's the guys at towards the end of the range that you're normally comfortable with that tend to be the most valuable and just getting to load up on a few of them. So I'm not trying to stick with a specific strategy. I'm trying to zig where everybody else is zagging and trying to scoop up value. Does that make sense?
I agree with that completely. It's like letting the draft come to you. You're not, I never go into a startup draft like, hey, I'm going to do a year 1 punt, or I'm going to do a productive struggle, or I'm going to win this year. I'll kind of let the draft dictate how my draft is going, like what build I'm going to choose. I think it's so important early on in a draft to get a feel for your league mates, because there will be guys that go into the startup like, I'm getting all young guys, I'm trading out, I'm picking up 2024 first, 2025 first. Like you need to find those guys if they're willing to be a good trade partner. Maybe they don't value the players like you do. Like you need to identify who those league mates are that you may be able to, just to say it frankly, like take advantage of them in trades. Like, I'm not one to say take advantage of people. Like you want to build bridges and make good deals, but I mean, you'd be lying. People are lying when they say they're not trying to get the most out of a trade.
For sure.
It's important to find those guys, send out feelers, figure out who's who.
And that's a good point that you just brought up that, we were going to get to at some point probably, but I do, while we're here, knowing your league mates is another crucial part of Dynasty that I don't think is discussed often. Now it is a little more difficult if it's in a league where you actually don't know your league mates. That could be a little trickier. But most people are playing in leagues with people that they know, they've run into, they're familiar with. They've talked to a bunch on Twitter and some Discord chat. Hopefully the Dynasty Nerds one.
There's new leagues starting there. I just joined one with people I don't know.
There you
the
go.
Discord chat.
There you go. But knowing, okay, this guy is a huge Cowboys fan. So yeah. I know that if I get a Cowboy, I might be able to get a little bit more in a trade from that guy than I would from anybody else. Or
that's true, it works.
This guy loves rookies, loves picks. I'm going to try to utilize that love of those picks that maybe I can give my first next year, which, my team's looking pretty good, and I can get, high up in a startup. Maybe that gets me into the third or fourth round, which normally, a pick like that shouldn't, but maybe it would in this type of scenario. Or so just understand and know your league mates, how guys tick, how they work, what types of deals they like to make and don't like to make, who's the experienced vets, who's the more what's the best, nicest way to put it? Like green newbies. That's a nice way to say it. I didn't want to say idiots.
Dynasty noobs.
Yeah, newbies is a nicer way to say it. So just understanding people can be a huge advantage to you in your league. So we touched on Superflex. I do want to quickly say something about one quarterback. If you are in one of those rare scenarios where you are in a one quarterback startup, are you okay taking a quarterback early because of how long you're going to be able to have them? I know that that's kind of been something that has been frowned upon, taking quarterbacks early in one quarterback leagues. What's your comfort level there?
So it kind of depends on the lineup configuration, because if it's only a start 7 league, then the quarterback position makes up 1/7 of your total scoring output. But if it's like a start 10, then the value of that one quarterback position in your lineup tends to devalue a little bit. So, yeah. I mean, it's making up 1/10 then of your total scoring output. So, I mean, all in all, whether it's start 7, start 10, I'm not over drafting a guy. I'm still letting the draft come to me, but the goal is to get one of those top quarterbacks, especially one of those top young ones.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of like seeing, once again, you're right. You let the draft come to you, but I think people have gotten so scared of drafting a quarterback too early that sometimes the Josh Allens, the Mahomes, those guys fall a little further than they should. And all of a sudden, I'm in the 4th round of a 1 QB league and no quarterbacks have been taken yet. And I'm like, well, the positional advantage that some of those top guys have is fairly significant. So I just wanted to touch on that quickly. Let's get back into trading. We kind of talked about moving up, moving down the board. Do you have one you like to do more than the other? How do you value the trades? I know that this is one of the questions I probably get most on Twitter, other than just would you trade player A for player B? Probably the second most I get is, how would you value this in a startup, this deal?
Yeah, so trading is the hardest thing inside of a startup, and especially valuing moving from 212 to 405 and picking up a 6th and swapping with an 8th, or it's really tough. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to really pay attention to the draft board, who's available. If you're trading back, think about what the worst case scenario might be of what players fall to you. But I think trading really falls back on preparing for a startup. And I think it's really important that you either have your own rankings,
yes,
or someone that you really trust like Garrett and at Dynasty Nerds. I mean, we have rankings. One thing I wish that we did have was tiered rankings, because in a startup, personally, I love having tiered based rankings
we
and
do need to
making
do
my
that.
own.
We do. That's a good point.
Yeah, and we are going to. I've talked to the guys about it, but I mean, we have so many things with the launch of our new app. You know, we've got so many tools and stuff that we're building.
Yeah.
So many cool things that are coming. And we will add tiered based rankings eventually. But I mean, we allow you now to make your own rankings in our app, the Dynasty GM app, and power the entire app yourself. But back to my point, like, making tiers of your rankings is so important, because if you're at the beginning of a tier and you value most of these players the same, then that can tell you, like, okay, I could trade back 6 to 7 spots and still get one of my guys in this tier and pick up maybe later, the next rookie drafts, some draft capital there.
Yeah.
So that's usually what I'm using to help guide my decisions.
Yeah. And we're pretty similar in that. I do look at and utilize the ADP of whatever platform you're on, because that can be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how closely you're paying attention to it. Because if you utilize it as a tool, understanding that most people are going to draft more or less based on ADP, it's a huge advantage for you if you are not doing that and you have your own ranks. Because then all of a sudden your tiers look different than the tiers on the ADP, and you're more easily able to maneuver in and out of those tiers without being confined to, like, oh wait, but they say that this guy should go in 10 picks, but I have him as the highest one. You know, like, you can more easily maneuver things that way. But for me, like, I'm not only drafting up or trading up or only trading down. Now, I will say I tend to trade down more than I trade up. And I think people, if you're playing with more experienced people, that tends to be the case. The reason being is what typically happens is you fall in love with player A and you want to make sure you have him on your team. And so people will move heaven and earth to make sure that they get up to get player A. So that's why more often than not, you'll see the experienced guys always looking to move down. Now, it can get to the point where it's annoying, where they're like, you know, every time they're on the clock and they're like, looking to move down here, looking to move down here, looking to move down. Like, it can get annoying. So don't be that guy. If you're somebody that is looking to move down, though, actually send out offers, because
get to know your league mates.
Yes. People love getting trade offers, even if they don't accept it. Like, Jarred, whenever I see a trade offer, I get so excited. Now, 80% of the time I reject it, 10% of the time I counter, and another 10 I actually accept. But, like,
you get a trade offer from me, I send it out to 10 other people in the league too.
It is true, Jarred, and it's really not a bad strategy. I've done that a couple times, especially in startups, where it's like, I know that I want to, let's say I want to see what kind of value I can get for 108. I'm up at 108. I'll send out 11 trade offers for the 108 with roughly what I want in a deal, and so let's say I want that guy second, I want his fifth, and I want a 24 first, and so, and that's just off the top of my head. I don't know that it's exactly correct, but it would be something in that ballpark. And I'll see, is anybody willing to bite? I might get 10 no's, but all it takes is one yes. You got Ramondre Stevenson in a league because actually, no, you just picked him up.
I got him off waivers, dude.
That was the most ridiculous. Never mind.
I spent my whole fab budget and nobody bid on him.
I'm so salty about that still to this day. Never mind. It wasn't even a trade. No, it was, who was it? There was somebody, you got rid of Taysom Hill. That's what it was. You got rid of Taysom Hill because you sent out like a second round pick to everybody, and one guy was like needing a
one guy gave me a first.
Was it a first?
Yeah, I got a first.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's a super flex league, and I had Taysom Hill stashed, and
So it's like 2 years ago.
He ended up being
still.
a starter. Yeah. And I think he had a great week. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to trade him now. I'm rebuilding. So
now it is a first in a Devy league, so that like is maybe not quite as valuable, but depending on where the first is, like we know every year that there's guys that slip through the cracks and whatnot.
Yeah.
But, all right.
So I just to add on to like trading inside of a startup, I know a lot of people are like unsure of the value of future rookie draft picks versus like the current startup. So I think one good way to figure that out is you look at where the current rookies are going inside the startup and where their rookie draft ADP is. So like Zach Charbonnet, like he's going at 807 right now. He's usually going around 111 to 201, 202 in rookie drafts. So that kind of gives you a gauge of like, okay, when I'm at like 806, then that's maybe, right around the time where I'm okay trading out and maybe picking up 2024 first or, getting a second round pick plus, moving back a round or two, stuff like that. I think that's a really good tool that you can help guide you on figuring out player value. Do you ever do that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love to compare whether it's the startup pick, the rookie, like I always love to compare it to who are the players currently in the ADP in that range. Now, they might not be those exact ones that are there because some people will overdraft guys, other people, whatever. But look at the players, 5 or 6 players that are roughly around that ADP. Are you comfortable getting that player for whatever the trade offer is? If so, then it's a good trade. If not, then it's not. So, let's go back to the example we were talking about before, 108. So at 108, you're probably looking at Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Jamar Chase. Like those are the guys that you're giving up in there. So if you're getting somebody's, let's say it's 204, and you're getting someone's 5th round pick and a 24 first. So at 204, roughly around there, that's like Garrett Wilson that you might be able to get. That's
Waddle.
Jalen Waddle. Maybe every once in a while Deshaun Watson will fall to that spot. Like, Dak. So like, okay, that's roughly who I'm going to get there. Then in the 5th round, and I don't have the ADP exactly.
I got it. There's Kirk Cousins, Jerry Jeudy, Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson. Those are like 5th round guys right now.
Perfect.
And then
so are you comfortable?
24 first. I'd be great with that.
Exactly.
So especially if I can get Watson there at that 204.
Exactly.
And it's just so important to state too, like picking up that 24 first, like that pick has insulated value.
It does.
The value of that pick is doing nothing but gaining value throughout the season. So if you are not comfortable with, 10 players on the board right now that are, next to go based on ADP, they're all just kind of meh to you. If you picking up that first round pick, that value is not changing. Like That's just going to gain value. So you're just going to the bank. You've got insulated value and that's not changing.
No, it's a great point. That is one thing, like, as much as we love certain players and, Devy guys, well, I'm sure we'll talk about Devy at some point on this show, but as much as we love those guys can break their legs. Like, those guys can decide to go back to school. Picks don't do that. Picks can't get injured. Picks can't go back to school. Like, if it's the 1-1, it is always going to be the 1-1, regardless of what happens. So that is one of the beautiful things about picks. And, when you're doing, I love getting people's first early on in a startup too, because at that point, nobody knows how their team is turning out yet. Like, so if you're already getting people's first round picks when you are in the first 3 or 4 rounds, no idea how that team looks yet. Yeah, you see 3 or 4 players on their team, but they could bomb the next few picks. They could trade for some bad value. They could whatever. So getting people's picks early on in the draft, you could end up getting the 101, 102, 103 from somebody because they totally botched their draft, but they didn't know their team sucked yet until the 11th round. And then they're like, oh crap, my team sucks. What do I do? And it's too late by that point. You already have their pick. So I love getting first early on in drafts because sometimes you really luck out and you get amazing value for, one of those picks where when you trade it, you kind of just assume mid value, 106, 107 type of value. Sometimes you can really capitalize on that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's move on here. We touched on quarterbacks real quick. Let's go to running backs. And there is this 0 RB strategy that has really gained a lot of steam over the years. And Dynasty Nerds, without officially saying 0 RB, has been a fairly big proponent of the 0 RB strategy, which is basically you don't take a running back in the first 7 or so rounds of your startup, 8 rounds of your startup, and you're looking to capitalize on young guys with unrealized potential, backups that could gain the job, like older players that you might only get a year or 2 out of. Like those are the guys that you're looking at later on in your drafts because you're going to capitalize on quarterbacks, wide receivers, especially in tight end premiums, tight ends early on in your draft, load up at those positions, and then just kind of figure out the running back as you go. Jarred, is that something that you do a lot? How comfortable are you with it? Has that strategy shifted or changed at all for you?
I don't really, fall under a category of strategy when it comes to running backs. I will say, I will only invest in running backs that have very good NFL draft capital and are 24 years old or younger, because the age cliff at running back is about 26, and they start going on a huge decline. And I want to get them before that point so I get some productive use out of them. And, I'm targeting first round running backs, obviously, or day 2 running backs, or guys that have already had a top 12 season. But I mean, for the most part, I am usually not targeting running back. If the value happens to fall to me, then I will invest in a guy like Travis Etienne, or even DeAndre Swift. He's 25, or Javonte Williams has I think he's presenting some good value now because of his injury. But it's important to state because it's the most volatile position and they lose value the quickest. Sure. Like Josh Jacobs crushed last year, but his value didn't really move at all because of the age cliff. And I mean, he's still only 25, but it's coming. So, I mean, he didn't really shoot up by any means. So that's how the running back position works in terms of value.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I, over the years, have been more or less a 0 RB guy. And like we've talked about, I don't go into it planning that. If there's a running back there that I like, I'll take him. But usually in my mind, the value I see at receiver, or quarterback, or something like that tends to trump that for me. But I will say this specific offseason, because everyone in this space, I feel like every year is getting smarter and smarter. Mm-hmm. The average Dynasty fan, the average Dynasty player is so much smarter than they were 4 or 5 years ago.
There's so much more content out there now.
Yeah.
So many more tools.
So it has been the kind of thing, and especially with how deep wide receiver has become, where I'm getting guys like Deontay Johnson in the 9th round, and I'm getting Michael Pittman Jr. in the 6th round, and I'm getting guys that I like pretty far down the draft board. Because of that, I'm a little more willing to invest in the guys you were talking about, the 24 or younger running backs that present. Like, if I'm right now in a startup, as much as I am always looking to go quarterback, if I'm at 110, 111 or later in a startup, I'm really looking hard at Bijan Robinson, which seems crazy, but the positional value that he's going to give you for the next 7-8 years is going to be pretty massive, or
top 10 running back. They smash.
Exactly. Even Jonathan Taylor at the end of the 2nd round. Like, I consider it if he's there. Now, there's often times where he's not. But if he's there, I might consider it. Breece Hall, like there are some of those guys that I might be willing to take in the top 2-3 rounds that I might not have been willing to take in the past, just because I know I can still find starting caliber wide receivers in round 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like I can still, Cortland Sutton right now, I think is like one of the best values. You can get him in like round 11 or 12. And, will he flame out? I don't know. But he is a starting caliber wide receiver that you can get real late. So it's just it's a one player example. I don't want to like hitch my horse specifically to Cortland Sutton, but
yep, calling you out on that all year now.
There you go. But there are players late like that you can absolutely get and can be quality starting assets at other positions. Whereas at running back, after you get to round 8 or so, 9 or so, it is ugly. Like I will not touch any of these guys with a 10-foot pole. So anything else on running back you want to touch on?
I mean, I'll just say it is the one position that from your rookie draft, you can plug and play these guys. It's not like a wide receiver or a tight end where you may have to wait 2 to 3 years before you start seeing like top end production. Though we have seen receivers come in the last few years, like and give you something right away. But running backs, you can draft them, you can play them. So if you don't target in the startup and you're doing maybe a productive struggle or year one punt type thing, running back's probably a position that you want to wait on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. Anything with wide receivers? I kind of touched on wide receivers while talking about running backs, just with where their value is. But the one thing that I can say, wide receiver, even though there is value late, I never regret taking a wide receiver. Like, even if, I miss out on some value at running back, or I don't want to say value, I miss out on a player I like at running back, something like that. With how long these wide receivers last typically, if I'm taking a guy that early that I truly believe is a talent, he's going to have a long career, like, it's never a bad move. Like, that's the safe, steady Eddie play is when in doubt, if you don't know, just take a receiver.
Yep. No, they have longer dynasty lifespan than running backs. So that's usually the position I'm targeting the most early on, is I want to get some younger, top-notch players, A.J. Browns, Justin Jeffersons, guys you can really build around that are going to be able to produce for you for the next 3 or 4 years.
Easily.
We'll say the age cliff, you want to pay attention to is usually around like 29. That's when they start really, really diving down. But you do see if they were like high-end producers, those are the guys that typically will still produce for you, like those wide receiver 2 seasons into their 30s. Maybe we could talk about a little bit like investing or drafting like these aging wide receivers that are still going, like Stephon Diggs still going like the 4th round. He's 29. Devontae Adams, 4'11". Right now is ADP. Cooper Kupp's, he's 30. He's going at 312 right now, according to our ADP. So, I mean, what are you doing with those guys?
Yeah, we touched on like productive struggle, but one of the things that I think is easier than ever because of how many people, especially if you play Dynasty, chances are you love getting young assets, you love picks, you get obsessed with what could be and how sexy a roster looks just, by, the screenshot of like, imagine this team in 3 years. Oh my goodness, with all these picks, it's going to be amazing. And look, I've done it. Like I mean,
it works.
It does.
It does work.
It does. But it is easier than ever to win a championship right off the bat. Like easier than ever, because guys like a Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs could all still absolutely be top 5, top 10 wide receivers this year. Like absolutely still could. And maybe for another year after that as well. Like all of these types of Tyreek Hill is another one in a similar range. I think maybe going a hair earlier than those guys, but another one in those ranges. Running backs like Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, players that should still have relatively great seasons that could still be top 10 running backs. You're getting in around like 10, 11. Like Joe Mixon, you can get around 9. Guys like that just, they're not sexy anymore. They don't have the youth. They might not break off as many long runs as they used to, but they're still going to get the workload. Like you can get those guys late. Aaron Rodgers, I still don't understand it, is like quarterback like 18 to 20 off the board. And he went to a team with young assets that they believe Aaron Rodgers is the guy to put him over the top and win him a Super Bowl. Will he? I don't know.
Our June ADP has QB 23.
Even worse. Even worse. It makes no sense to me. So there are players like that you can.
People are thinking he's probably going to retire after this year.
Maybe
who knows? Who knows?
We thought that about Tom Brady 8 years ago.
Yeah. I guess the one thing I'll say about investing into those type of players is like you're kind of locking yourself into if you do take Cooper Kupp, if you do take Diggs or Devontae Adams, like you're trying to win right now. Yep. And I don't necessarily like to lock myself into a build like that early.
Sure.
It just depends how the draft ends up playing out. Because then I'm trying to target Travis Kelce too to get that advantage at that position. But the value of those players is doing nothing but going down. So I don't usually like buying into those type of assets.
I don't either. I don't do it often. But I actually did. If you're interested more on like that and what it could look like, head to our YouTube page. I actually did a video on like winning your draft year one. So you can head there, look at
I didn't see that.
You didn't see it?
No.
Came about a month ago.
Yeah.
It's a good video.
Oh, okay. My lifespan.
Yeah, your life has been pretty nuts. All right, let's move over to tight ends real quickly. Tight ends are one of the most frustrating positions. Actually, I'll just say it's the most frustrating position in fantasy football because almost every year you have one dominant guy, two other really good ones, and then like everybody else. Like your tight end like 4 or 5 is not drastically different than your tight end 12 or 13. And so it is a really, really difficult position to get right. So for you, especially, let's look at it from a tight end premium angle. Doesn't have to be a tight end premium angle because there's still a huge positional advantage if you get one of those top 3 or 4 guys. But let's look at it from a tight end premium lens. Do you put an emphasis on trying to get that positional value, or is it not super important to you to get one of those elite tight ends?
So elite, like I have to get one of those elite tight ends or I'm just punting the position because the other guys really aren't doing much for your wins week to week. Like there's always trades after the fact, you can always try and trade for a tight end to fill that spot for you if you don't end up with a Mark Andrews or a Travis Kelce or Kyle Pitts now. But I really think if the draft has to fall to me for me to take one of those guys. So obviously it depends on your position in your draft, what position you are and how the board falls. But I'm usually not trading up to get one of them. But I will take a Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce if the timing is right. If I don't, I'm pretty much punting the position.
Would you add Kyle Pitts into that category as well? Like you okay,
for sure.
Yeah, Kelsey's an interesting one. I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole, but he's a really odd case of being a crazy old player for fantasy football purposes, but he's still being taken as the top guy off the board. And so
just such a beast.
It is a really odd situation because you look at the number one guys at other positions. You're looking at Mahomes or Allen at quarterback. You're looking at Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase at receiver. And you're looking at Bijan Robinson at running back, maybe Brees. You could make an argument for CMC in that range. I wouldn't personally. But based on ADP, it's Bijan and Brees and Taylor that are really up there. So
what are you doing?
He's unique. He's unique in that situation. But I'm 100% with you, and I'm glad you said it. It's either I get one of those top guys, or I'm waiting until round 9+ to start drafting a tight end. And if a decent one still falls to me that I think can be a top 10 guy, then cool. Like, I'm not upset about that, but I'm not going to like hustle to get George Kittle. I'm not going to hustle to get Dallas Goedert.
I've been getting a lot of Njoku.
Sure. Lately. And it's probably round 9, round 10.
Yeah. I forget where I got him lately, but he's, about 909 is his ADP right now. Tight end 10. Yep. But he's still only 26 years old, extremely athletic. Last year was his first time being like the guy, and he had some moments, but Deshaun Watson, I think this year that offense is going to be so much better.
Yeah.
Browns fan.
Yay. Good team. All right. So one thing, when we're looking at this from kind of the, 30,000 foot view?
I don't know.
How high is the feet? 10,000, 30,000?
10,000. It doesn't matter. We know what you mean.
Thousands of foot view. One of the things that we didn't touch on that you did put it in our notes here that I do want to make sure, and people probably assumed it when I said value-based drafting, but I want to make sure that I'm crystal clear on it. Do not draft for need.
Yes.
Do not draft for need in your startups. You can trade. You can always trade for need later, but do not draft for need. Here's the reason why. When you draft for need, you now jack up your board that you made. And you say that, yes, maybe I have 2 wide receivers and 2 quarterbacks already, and I really feel the pressure to get a running back. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna panic a little bit, and I'm gonna draft Joe Mixon because I need to get a running back, and I don't have one yet. Well, now what you did is you took a guy that should have been a round 7 pick, and you took him in round 5. And the players that are in that round 5 range are worth significantly more than Joe Mixon, when you could have easily taken a receiver there in round 5, even though you already have 2. And then you could have later traded for Joe Mixon. And plus, like, you also got a 2nd round pick on top of it, or you get something else on top of it. But instead of just losing the value to take a guy that you felt like you had to get there, take the best player that you have on your board. Now, the best player on your board might not be the same as somebody else's board, but take the best player on your board.
Yeah, value. I'm always looking, like, right before I take a player, I always ask myself, can this guy's value go up? Plain and simple. Could I see a scenario where this guy's value goes up? If the answer is no, then I think about it a lot longer. And sometimes I still pull the trigger. It just depends. But most of the time, I'm not drafting them.
You're probably in a win now mode if you're still doing it and the answer is no to that question.
Right.
Because you're taking Derrick Henry. You're taking, one of those kind of guys. But otherwise, I'm with you. Like, I do think it is good to look at how high could this player be taken next year? Is there a realistic possibility that he's going around 2, 3, 4 rounds higher than what I'm taking him at this year? And I think that's another way to look at it. Jarred, another thing that you put in here, in looking at the startup, and this goes a little bit back to the trading and different things like that, but you put in here, players are always risky, but picks have insulated value. Now, you touched on the picks and how insulated those values are, but talk a little bit about the risk of the players, because I understand what you mean, but there's also like a counterpoint to it. So I kind of want to talk about both sides of this.
I guess what I meant by that is we all pretend like we know more than we do.
Yes.
Like, we don't actually know what's going to happen.
We're taking educated guesses.
We can exactly. So players get injured all the time. Guys get arrested, and there's just risk involved, a lot more risk involved in a player when comparing it to a draft pick. That's pretty much all I meant by that.
Yeah, which totally agree with. But some people will take that to also mean, and I want to make sure that they don't, to mean that, well, shoot, I should just acquire picks and take a bunch of those rookie picks instead of veteran players. And that's where the pick loses its value. I shouldn't say loses its value, but that's where the risk comes in with the pick. If you're constantly having picks, the pick itself is never going to lose value. However, once that pick becomes an actual rookie player, now we don't know anything. Now we don't know how this guy's going to play out. It could be a Bijan Robinson where we feel 99.9% sure that dude's going to be a stud. Mm-hmm. But it could also be Jalen Reagor. It could also be, you could be drafting these players. So the pick itself doesn't, but the second it becomes that player, there is a much higher risk. And, you've done more study on the numbers of it, but if you hit half the time in your rookie drafts, like in the first round, you've done pretty well. There's a lot of potholes and a lot of misses inside those rookie picks. So as much as the pick itself is not going to lose value, those rookie players could. So sometimes instead, right before that pick becomes a player, maybe even on draft day, when the hype is at its all-time peak of all these players we're excited about, sometimes it's really worth it to trade. All right, I'm going to trade the 104 right now, and I'm going to get myself, player X, because I know that in the best case scenario, this rookie player turns out to be the player that I'm trading for. So now I don't have to worry as much about that player panning out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, picks are currency. So the more of them you have, the more buying power you have, and you can invest that into safer players or players that you deem less risky that have good profiles, first, early draft capital, young, have already produced a hit.
High like nerd score players.
Yes. So exactly. I just got what you said.
Yeah.
Do we want to get into types of builds or strategies, or I think that could almost be an episode in itself, really.
Let's save it for another episode, because we could talk deep, and we touched on quite a few of them just in passing. But I mean, we could go deep in the productive struggle, the zero RB, the hero RB, we could go
QB hoard.
Exactly. We could go deep into all those. Yeah. And I think we should, because I think that there's value in understanding those strategies and recognizing them when other people are doing them in drafts too. So that way you can kind of get ahead of runs and things like that. So that was actually the last thing I wanted to touch on. You mentioned earlier about tiers and how players can fall into tiers for you and out of tiers for you, and things like that. And in our trades, are you somebody that is going to try to get ahead of runs? And what I mean by a run, when I say that, is, we haven't seen any tight ends go, and it's the beginning of round 3. I have a feeling there's going to be a run of tight ends where we're going to see Kelsey, Pitts, and Andrews all go here real quick, or people have been waiting on running back. I bet round 7, we're going to see 6 or 7 running backs go. Do you like to try to get ahead of those, or are you somebody that would prefer to trade into the end of a run to get that last player in a tier that you like?
I always try to be at the front of them or start them. Yeah. If the ADP dictates that they're falling or it should start here soon. If it's a guy like you said, tight end run, if I can get a Kelsey or Andrews and it's about that time where they probably should be going, then I'm happy to do that. I'm probably not going to trade up to get into the back of one. I'll just kind of deem that as all right, I missed out on that. I'll address that later.
Yeah. Yeah. The only time I'll trade into a run is if it's the last player in that tier, and pretty soon I'm worried the run is going to continue into players that are no longer in that tier. So I like want to get the last one of a tier.
Yeah.
But
that's where you want to be. I mean,
because I don't want to get the
especially when
first one of the
trading
next
back.
tier. That sucks.
Yeah, that's how you pick up value is, when you have your tiers in front of you and you recognize like, okay, we're at the beginning of a tier. I can trade back about 6 guys, get this guy. Am I cool with that? What do I want in return?
Yep, absolutely.
And that's something we're actually going to build out in the GM. We have a trade calculator and a trade browser that you can actually see real live trades that have happened across real leagues. And we're going to build out the ability to see picks and trades that have happened only inside of a startup. So there'll be a startup view, and it'll really help people. You can select, okay, as 212, what picks happened, what trades happened for 212 in a startup. Yeah. That'll be huge.
That'll be dope. Absolutely. Well, Jarred, I think we touched on all the things we wanted to get to. Anything else that you want to talk about here before we wrap things up?
Not really. I mean, we obviously, Garrett and I are with Dynasty Nerds, and we just launched our app on iOS and Android. So it's the Dynasty Nerds app on your phone. So go ahead and download that. Check it out. I mean, we are adding the feature list of the backlog of tools that we're going to be adding to this thing is immense, and it's just going to continue to get better. We appreciate everyone's support. If you are not a Dynasty Nerds member, you can go to Underdog. We are partnered with Underdog, and use the promo code NERDS. Deposit $10. You'll get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And you will get a free year subscription to dynastynerds.com, the GM app, all the tools, the extra podcasts with Dynasty Nerds, Nerd Score, the film room, everything that we have to offer for $10.
Awesome stuff. Well, real quickly before we get out of here, this is the first episode of Talkin Dynasty, so your support is huge. So first of all, thank you so much for listening or watching this. This is something that Jarred and I have been dreaming about for years, like literal years. We've been talking about doing something like this. So we're excited for it to finally be coming true for us. So whether you're watching this on YouTube, put some comments in there. Whether your podcast, give it 5 stars, give it all the comments and stuff like that. Please help support this show so that way we see that it's worth our time and our efforts to continue to give you all of this good content.
And I'd love to hear game theory questions, topics that you guys want to hear from us, or people in the industry that you like to listen to that would be good to have on the show, because that's another big thing at this show is we want to do interviews. We want to bring on other people around the industry that have a different perspective, offer a different insight through a different lens, and just pick their brain and learn from them. So if you guys have anybody suggestions, drop it in the comments. Love to hear it.
Perfect. Well, for Garrett Price, for Jarred Wackerly, this has been Talking Dynasty.